We have been reading this sutra called the Sabbasava Sutta. I explained to you what we mean by asava. And what this means is we are really dealing with the emotions. And we have found that the emotions that we live with is the cause of all the unhappiness, all the problems in the world. That is what the Buddha pointed out. The word used by the Buddha was tanha. The word tanha refers to the emotion. And all these emotions are self-centered. This is why the emotions have been described by the Buddha as lobha, dosa and moha. Lobha I translate as lust, dosa as hate, and moha as the notion of self. All selfishness comes from this notion of self. So these three things, lust, hate and delusion, it's called delusion. And the delusion is the notion of self. And that is how selfishness comes up. In other words, the lust and the hate are connected with that notion of self. That is why they are self-centered, selfish. The aim of the teachings of the Buddha is to get rid of this selfishness. Now when we speak of a person who is self-centered, that is a narrow mind. When we say a narrow mind, we are talking about a mind that is all the time thinking about oneself. I want this, I want that, or I don't have this. And some people treat me badly. All the time complaining about oneself. If we begin to be thinking all the time only about oneself, we are having a narrow mind. But when we begin to think of others, it's not only myself. Others also feel hungry. They also need food. I can help others to get food. Or I can make a sacrifice. I share what I have with another person. So we are beginning to think of other people. So when we begin to think of others and not harm others or hurt others, and instead we try to help others, that is a broad mind. So what the Buddha is talking about is, the broader our mind, the less unhappy we become. If we are all the time thinking about ourselves, we will be unhappy people. But if we begin to think of others, I am not the only person who is suffering. Others are also suffering. And so we should help others. Or we can join and try to help ourselves. So we are thinking, that is a broad mind. And that cultivation of the broad mind is what is called metta, bhavana. Metta, the word metta means friendliness or friendship. So that means when we think of a friend, we are thinking of another person like ourselves. So that thinking of others becomes very important as we begin to mature. The maturity of the mind comes from broadening the mind. So that is the way to freedom from unhappiness. But in trying to mature the mind, what comes against this is our emotion, self-centered emotion. Now some people, when they talk about emotion, they also talk about good emotions. They say there are bad emotions and there are also good emotions. And if you ask what are these good emotions, they will say, well, love for others is a good emotion. So they use the word love. But love is an attachment. Becoming attached to someone, that is love. An attachment is self-centered. So, what we are talking about is not an attachment. We are talking about giving up attachments and becoming interested in others for their sake, not getting interested in others for your sake. If you become interested in another person for your sake, that is not unselfish. You have to become interested in others for their sake. That is the real unselfishness. So what this means is, all emotions are self-centered. When we become interested in others for their sake, that means we are not self-centered. If we are interested in others for their sake. Therefore, what we call metta is not an emotion. It is the absence of emotion. There the mind becomes calm and tranquil. That is why I spoke about metta, karuna, mudita and upekkha. Metta, karuna, mudita and upekkha. Metta is becoming interested in the welfare of all beings. You cannot have metta for one individual. You can love one individual. But metta is for all beings. Metta is not only for people of one's country, what is called patriotism. That is not metta. That is, you are interested in people of your country, but you begin to fight with people of other countries. That is not metta. Metta means, may all beings be well, comfortable, peaceful and happy. You are spreading your mind outwards. To be interested in the welfare of all beings without exception. And when that happens, you are also thinking of others as others are as important as ourselves. When others are as important as ourselves, we can make sacrifices for others. Share with others. That state of mind where we don't make any distinction between oneself and others, that is what is called karuna. So karuna is metta at a deep level. How deeply are you interested in the welfare of others? You may become interested in others to just help a little. But it is like a mother thinking of her only child, willing to make a sacrifice for the child. So in the same way, you think of all beings that all beings are as important as oneself. And when that is done, your selfishness disappears. You are not thinking in terms of yourself. Instead of thinking I and you begin to think of we. Just as a mother thinks of the whole family, we, not just I and you. Now all these disputes between husband and wife comes up mainly when they become self-centered. Each person thinking only about himself or herself. But if you begin to think of we, the whole family, then these conflicts will not be very strong. Then there will be no divorces. So it's very important to understand that when we begin to think of all beings, our self disappears. Just as a river, when it enters the ocean, the river disappears. It simply becomes the ocean. So in the same way, when you begin to practice metta, the self disappears. You are thinking only of all beings. And when the self disappears, all unhappiness disappears. When the unhappiness disappears, you are happy. That happiness of selflessness is what is called mudita. So metta turns into karuna and karuna turns into mudita. Mudita is happiness. That is very important to understand. How metta turns into karuna and karuna turns into mudita. But this mudita is not an excitement. It is not an emotional excitement. It is a very calm and tranquil state of the mind. That calmness and tranquility of mind when the mind is calm and tranquil, it is not disturbed by whatever happens in the external world. Therefore, you are not affected by what are called the changing vicissitudes of life. The changing vicissitudes of life. The vicissitudes means gain and loss, fame and ill fame, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. These are the changing vicissitudes of life. So whatever happens in the external world, your mind is not disturbed. Your mind is now calm and tranquil. And that tranquil mind is turned inwards and not outwards. And when the mind is turned inwards, you begin to see what is inside. The mind being turned inwards, you begin to see what is inside. What do you see inside? What you see is impersonal activity. Impersonal activity. That means there is no real self or personality inside. You are thinking of a self only in comparison with what is outside. When we see something or hear something or smell something or taste something or touch something, that is an experience. That's an experience. And that experience has two parts. What you experience is seen as something outside. What you see, or what you hear, or what you smell, or what you taste, or what you touch, is always seen as something outside. So that experience of something outside, that is called an objective experience. Objective. So that is when you are looking at something, an object. The object is always outside. But there is another part of this same experience, which is the looking or seeing. The seeing is taken as a subjective experience, and we personalize the subjective experience and say, this is mine. I am seeing. Seeing is mine. If I like it, the liking is mine. I like. You see? We divide our experience into two, something outside, something inside. And that something inside is what we call myself. Something outside is something other than myself. So I am creating the self. When we personalize the subject, but once our mind is focused within, we begin to understand that what I have been personalizing and calling myself is only an impersonal process of activity that is going on. And so the self disappears. That is the insight that results in the disappearance of all suffering. Because all suffering is due to selfishness. The selfishness disappears. It is with the unselfish mind that we look at what is going on inside. So it is with that unselfish mind that we look at it, and as a result, we begin to see that the self is only a delusion. So the self disappears. So it's very important to understand this, and this is what we are seeing in this sutra. So it is very important to understand why we have been talking about this, our whole practice. And in order to do this, there are four main parts of this thing called meditation. Meditation has four parts. It has been described as preventing bad thoughts arising in the mind. The second part is eliminating the bad thoughts once they have arisen in the mind. The third is cultivating good thoughts in the mind. And the fourth is to maintain the good thoughts once they have arisen in the mind. Those are the four parts of the practice. Now, in order to understand this properly, we have to understand that we have to see it from a modern scientific point of view. Now the scientists have created words to help them express their ideas properly. An important word is organism. Any animal or any plant is seen as a living organism. Living organism. Whatever is living is an organism. And every organism is not conscious. Every organism is not conscious. Most organisms are unconscious. The plant is unconscious. Even the lower animals are unconscious. Real consciousness comes only to the human being. There are other animals who are conscious to some extent, even like the dogs and the cats. They are also conscious to some degree. But the human beings are more conscious. And they are conscious of two things. They are conscious of a world outside and also conscious of a self inside. When we talk about the body, we see it as something outside. But when we talk about the mind, we see it as something inside. So that is important to understand. Now, all animals are not perfect in this consciousness. So it is the human being that is more conscious. But still, the human being is not perfect. You have to become more conscious. It is because we are not fully conscious that we are carried away by emotions. We begin to fight and quarrel. There is so much crime in the world. There is so much wars in the world, terrorism. All these problems are because we are not fully conscious. So when we speak of a person who is fully conscious, we are thinking of a person like the Buddha. That is why we say the Buddha is the awakened one who has awakened from the dream of existence. Because we are all thinking that we exist. That is because we are not fully conscious. So, if we begin to understand that we are simply organisms in an environment, we are like a machine, and the environment stimulates our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, and our body. And this stimulation, ultimately, we begin to react to the stimulus. And that reaction is in the form of a desire for something, or hatred of something, or fear of something, or worry about something. These are reactions to the stimulus. And these are happening automatically. We are not doing it. It is happening to us. It happens unconsciously. We are not even fully conscious of what is happening. When we become frightened, we can't even stop that. When we become angry, we can't even stop that. When a desire arises, we can't just stop it. When we begin to worry, we cannot just stop it. Why? Because these things are happening to us. We are not doing it. It is happening unconsciously. So this is why it is very important to become conscious of what is going on. And it is by becoming conscious of what is going on that we can stop this. And that becoming conscious is what we call satipatthana, which is today translated as mindfulness. But I prefer to translate it as introspection. It is not just mindfulness. We have to turn our mind inwards and watch what is going on. And that is called introspection. So, this is what this sutra is all about. And here the Buddha is talking about this. And in degrees, how the person begins to become aware of these reactions. And the reaction begins with perception. We begin to become aware through perception. That means we see something. First we see something, and then the next we begin to interpret what we see. We begin to give meaning to what we see. And that is how we begin to identify what I see. If I look at this, I see it. Then the next thing I do is I try to give meaning to what I see. So I identify it and say, this is a bottle, or this is a bottle of water. then I might think I am thirsty, and then I should drink some water, and I drink. There you are. So I have not only given meaning to what I saw, that has led to a desire to drink. And then I expressed the desire in action. And I drank the water. So in the same way, that is what is called a chain reaction. I start with perception, then I give a meaning to what I saw, which is the interpretation or recognition, and then the emotion that is aroused in the form of a desire, and then I express the emotion in action. Now these various steps in that process of reaction, the Buddha used words. The first word is vijnana, perception. Then comes mano, which is the giving interpretation to what I saw. That leads to the chitta. Chitta is the emotional arousal. And then the emotion is expressed in action. And that action is the karma. But there is a difference between a human being and another animal at this point. Now, if you take a dog, if the dog sees someone, what does the dog do? Begins to bark. That is, the emotion is expressed in action. The emotion is expressed in action. But the human being, before expressing the action, the human being thinks, how should I act in this situation? Am I going to just shout at that person, or am I going to greet that person? So that action, you make a decision. Now that decision is a very important thing. And that is what the Buddha called Chetana. Chetana is that decision that you make. Even if you are angry, you don't express the anger. That is what. Even if you are angry, you don't express the anger. Now, if you go and work job, and the boss says something and you become angry, you are not going to start attacking the boss. If you do that, you will be thrown out. That is the end of your job. You see, so you have to act in the proper way. So every time you become angry, you don't act in the angry way. So that is possible only for the human being. Other animals can't do that. So this is why there is this choice. And it is that choice that we call Chetana. Chetana is the choice. And the karma, the Buddha called Chetana, which is the choice. So, we have really two parts of the mind. One is the thinking part and the other is the emotional part. The thinking part is what is called mano. That is where we interpret what we saw and think, form a concept. And that emotional part is chitta, that is called chitta. And what happens is, we are not all the time using the thinking part. Sometimes even that choice we are not making. You might make use of that choice when you are in the office, but when you come home, you may be fighting with your wife or husband or maybe your children or maybe your neighbors. So this is how we are not all the time making use of this choice. Because most of the time we are carried away by emotion. And if we allow ourselves to be carried away by emotions, we are not using our thinking part. So this is why the Buddha pointed out that we should constantly be conscious and aware of what we are thinking, what we are speaking, and what we are doing. It is only by being conscious that we can stop this. Because otherwise these things are happening unconsciously. So we should not let these things happen unconsciously. But sometimes these unconscious things have become useful. For example, you learn to drive a car. If you learn to drive the car, at the beginning you are fully conscious of everything that you do. But after some time, you will be driving unconsciously. You don't have to think very much. Everything happens unconsciously. Now that kind of unconsciousness is useful and necessary. So this is what we should constantly think about. That is forming good habits. That is the meaning of forming a good habit. A habit is going on unconsciously. And but it is consciously directed. At the beginning it is consciously directed, and then even if you learn to type, at the beginning your fingers go to the wrong places, but after some time, without your knowledge, the fingers go to the right place. So you don't have to think every time you type. So that doing things unconsciously become necessary if it is done at the beginning consciously and properly directed. But those actions are not emotional actions. But the problem is that we learn these habits not when we are adults. We begin to learn the habits from childhood. And from childhood, if we learn bad habits, we carry the bad habits into the adult life. So this is why it is very important to teach the children good habits. And if the children, as a child, you have not learned the good habits, still you can learn the good habits as an adult. But for that, you have to make effort to do that. It's like learning to type or learning to play a musical instrument. So in the same way, you have to learn the new habits. So anyway, this sutra, we have been reading most of it, so we don't have to go through this. The important thing is you can read it for yourself, and you'll begin to understand that here the Buddha is talking about these four things. The four things are guarding the senses. That means all our mind impurities come through the senses. Impurities are simply the emotions. They start with perception, that is, we see something, or hear something, or smell something, or taste something, or touch something, and we begin to interpret that, and according to the way we interpret desire, or hatred, or fear, or worry arises, and then we act on that. So we have to become aware of that process. Be conscious. And it is by becoming conscious that we can stop or change that way. So according to the way we interpret what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, that we begin to react emotionally. And that emotional reaction, once we have become emotionally excited, we can become aware of that emotion and then decide, should I act in this emotional way or should I act rationally? And then act rationally instead of emotion. And that is what is called good karma. Good karma is simply, karma is not some mysterious force that punishes and rewards people. That is not true. Karma simply means the way you act. And before you act, you choose the right way. So it is your choice that is important. So I think we have done it. if you read carefully this sutra, you begin to understand that all these different ways we begin to stop this reaction. That is all that we are trying to do. We try to stop the reaction, which is how the organism reacts to the stimulus coming from outside. So if you learn to stop the reaction by becoming aware, by becoming conscious, you are trying to become conscious of the unconscious process. And that is what Sigmund Freud, who started this thing called psychoanalysis, he saw this method, although he could not completely solve it. It was the Buddha who really solved the problem, and he was able to make a complete transformation of a human being. He produced what is called the Arahant. Arahant. Ara means the bond. Han means to break the bond. We are bound because we are carried away by emotion. So here the Buddha taught people how to break the bonds. So the Arahant is the person who has broken. There are 10 bonds, and the 10 bonds are broken gradually, not all of a sudden. The gradual process. And that gradual process is what this sutra is talking about. So next time we are going to talk about another sutra where the Buddha enumerates the steps. This is the first step, this is the second step, this is the third step, like that. It's a kind of repetition of the same thing, but it is repeated in a different way. So it's useful to know these steps properly, so that now in very short, the steps are Sila, Samadhi and Panya, 3 steps. But when you go into it, there are more details, and so that's what we are really talking about. But the main thing in short is to stop reacting to the stimuli. Okay, so we'll stop here for the day, and now you can ask questions if you have any problems. There is a question, Chetana, decision or choice, is it emotion or without emotion? Anyone who can answer that question? Most of you who are listening to me should be able to answer that question. Our choice is between emotional action and rational action. So the choice is not emotion. Choice cannot be emotion. We have to choose between emotion and reason. So it cannot be, choice cannot be done. That means that thinking faculty or the thinking part of the mind has to come in and interfere with the emotional action. If you are angry and you want to fight, the thinking part comes in and says, no, don't try to fight, because if you try to fight, you lose your job, because you are trying to fight with your boss, and the boss can chase you out. So you stop fighting, and that is the rational action. So it's like that. It's a choice. Then you ask the question, Satipatthana, is it cultivating tranquility or wisdom, or both? Both are cultivated. Now I said Satipatthana is simply, Sati means attention. Sati means attention. Sati, Upattana. Upa means inside. Thana means to place. So in other words, to place the attention inside. No, to place the attention inside is what we call introspection. That is why I said that Satipatthana means introspection. You are looking inside, not outside. Now when we look outside, we will see something either attractive or maybe something that you dislike. If you see something attractive, a desire arises. If you see something unattractive or something that you hate to see, then you begin to hate what you see. Now, instead of focusing on the attention, of giving attention to what you saw, you look inside. And when you look inside, what are you going to see? What you are going to see is not what is outside there, but your reaction to that outside thing. You are going to see how you reacted. That is the introspection. So when you see how you reacted, you become conscious of what was going on unconsciously. And when you become conscious of what is going on unconsciously, that unconscious process stops. That is the purpose of looking at it. Now this is what Sigmund Freud did in his psychoanalysis. He was practicing introspection. And when he was able to see the unconscious process that is going on, that process stopped. That was his method. Because what is called neurosis and psychosis and all these mental problems, most of these things are going on unconsciously. The person is not fully aware of what that person is thinking or doing or any of those things. But the moment you become conscious of this, then it stops. So that is the meaning of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is an effort to make the patient or the person who is suffering from a problem, to make them conscious of what is going on unconsciously in their minds. That is the main thing in psychotherapy. Any other questions? You have another one?
Related to the first one.
What? You want it?
Related to the first question about Chaitana.
When you speak through that, I can't hear you properly. What do you say?
Yeah, Bhante, just now you say Chaitana has to be conscious. Chaitana has to be conscious when you make choices.
Chaitana.
That's
Chaitana is, you are conscious, yeah.
So if Chaitana is conscious, that means Chaitana does not, all the Chaitana actions are good karma actions.
Chaitana is
Conscious actions.
yeah.
So that means all the actions with Chaitana is wholesome action.
Wholesome, yeah.
So Chaitana is wholesome. Can I say that? Chaitana is wholesome.
No. Chaitana is simply a decision. You see, Chaitana is a decision either to act in the angry way or to act in the rational way. Chaitana is not always rational. You might decide, I don't care about these things, I am going to kill that man and start. That is the wrong Chaitana. But it was done consciously. So that means that it was a bad action, not always a good action. Yeah. Any other question? No more questions. Okay, that's good. So next day we will have another sutra where a certain person comes and asks Buddha, the gradual process, the steps taken. So it's good to become fully conscious of the method of the Buddha. And so we'll discuss that. So if there are no questions, we end. You have another question? No, you have to come here.
So this your Chetana, is it coming from your thinking part or?
The Chetana is coming from the thinking part, yeah.
So in that case, that's why you mentioned last time the thinking part is always conscious. So if let's say this guy is how to say that, decide in the wrong decision. For instance, is going to kill a person like that. So that means this thinking part is not considered as a conscious process anymore.
No. It is conscious, but even although you make the decision consciously, the anger is very great at that point. And so you give in to the anger. You know, there is an interesting story. Something that happened in Sri Lanka. I was very young at that time. There was a man who was a kind of carpenter like. He was one of the poor people in the villages in Sri Lanka. His main job is cutting wood. You see big trees, you cut into small planks or something like that for building various articles or houses or things like that. His job was that. But at the same time, he had a garden in his house where he was growing vegetables and things like that. And in this village, there was a man who wants to show that he's a very powerful man, and he used to threaten people and get things, and he drinks and he does all kinds of bad things. So people are frightened of him. And so one day, this man was a very good person, that well-behaved person who was the carpenter. So he had been planting some vegetables in his garden. And this man, I don't know what you call those people, this man came and took some vegetables this man had planted. Maybe we'll say some bananas or something, taking that whole thing, cutting it and taking it home, that sort of thing. This man, he was a very good man, but he became angry. This man is now trying to steal things from me also. he had a knife that is used for cutting down coconuts from the coconut trees. It was a curved knife like that. And so he took this knife, went straight to that man's house. That man was eating some at that time, I suppose. But he went and took his knife and cut off his neck. And then he had been saying that, I don't care about my life. At least my children will be without troubles. And so he thought he was making a sacrifice of himself for the children, other people, innocent people, because this man was creating problems for the whole village. And he straight away went to the police station and said, I have killed such and such a person, and this is the knife I used. You can do whatever you like to me. So he was taken and put in prison, and of course ultimately there was a case, and because he was a poor man, he couldn't hire good lawyers. Otherwise, if he hired a good lawyer, that lawyer could have saved him. But because he didn't have a good lawyer also, ultimately he was condemned to imprisonment, but he was not really killed by the law. He was put in prison for life or something like that. But actually he was not a criminal like that. The other man was the real criminal. Things like that happen. So that means he has made a decision. He is a person who makes the decision, but his decision was that he is making a sacrifice for the others. Maybe it is something like what Jesus did. He's also made a sacrifice. But he was willing to be punished for whatever he did. So that is how things happen ultimately. So even if you use your thinking, reasoning part, still you can make wrong decisions. Or it depends on what other people think. You see, one person might think that is the right decision. Who knows? So it's like that.